I'm Sam Roberts of the New York Times. Welcome to the New York Times Close Up. Debate, discussion, discord, sometimes agreement, hallmarks of our political and social discourse. In a moment, we'll talk with City Council Speaker Corey Johnson about all of the above. My former Times colleague Todd Purdum has something wonderful to tell us. It's the story of Rodgers and Hammerstein's Broadway revolution, a revolution that continues to this day with the latest production of Carousel. He then joins my Times colleague Eleanor Randolph to discuss the issues of the week on The Backstory, and I'll have some additional thoughts on Coda. But first, City Council Speaker Corey Johnson. He represents a wide swath of Lower Manhattan, also sets the agenda for the entire City Council. Mr. Speaker, you want to put some things back in the mayor's proposed budget. You've got until the end of June to do it. One of those, of course, is the Fair Fare program, some other things. How are you going to pay for those?
Well, the city's budget over the last 4 years has grown from when the mayor took office to $73 billion to this upcoming budget we're voting on, $89 billion, a $16 billion growth in 4 years. And just since the preliminary budget, in the last 8 weeks, there is a growth of about $1.2 billion. Some of that is temporary money. We saw an $800 million bump in personal income tax money that came in. We have plenty of money. I think we should do a few things. One, fully fund fair fares. $212 million helps 800,000 New Yorkers who are living below the poverty line.
And that would do what?
It would give them half-price subway cards. So a monthly Metro card right now is a little over $120. This would cut it in half for them. It would save a poor family of four making under $25,000 a year. It would save them $700 annually. It's a big deal. I think given that we're in good times right now, the fiscal health of the city, we need to put $500 million away in reserves. And I also think we have a broken property tax system, and we should give some property tax relief, a $400 one-time rebate to homeowners while we go to Albany next legislative session and ask to fix our property tax system.
Spending on the homeless has gone up in just a couple of years from $1 billion to $2 billion. How high is it going to go?
Well, just in this budget, the proposal the mayor released last week, we saw another increase in over $200 million in the Department of Homelessness. And as you said, Sam, we're up to multi-billions of dollars. One of the things that I keep saying is we need a plan that doesn't manage homelessness, but reduces homelessness. And the council, in our budget response, put forward some things that I hope the mayor will look at and adopt. We want to put more money into supportive housing. That helps the chronically street homeless people struggling with alcoholism, drug addiction, untreated mental health issues. We want to increase the rental voucher amount. Right now, if you're giving a rental voucher to someone who's in a shelter, and I'm making it up, the amount's at $1,500, but they find an apartment for $1,600, they can't get in that apartment. And the last thing is, in the shelters across the city, we need housing specialists to help homeless people navigate how to get an apartment, how to get into transitional housing. Tonight in New York City, 63,000 New Yorkers will sleep in the shelter system, 25,000 of whom are children under the age of 16. We're in crisis.
And that's not counting the people sleeping out on the street.
And that number could be 7,000?
City Limits came out with a report recently pointing out that this mayor has put in even more money for public housing. And yet we still have a crisis that the governor has stepped in on, said he's going to mandate some expenses. Have you been able to evaluate yet what that is going to cost the city?
Well, we are trying to determine that. I'm really proud that in my first few weeks as Speaker, we reconstituted an oversight and investigations unit at the City Council, and our first major hearing was to look at the heat and hot water outages at NYCHA during the winter after the bomb cyclone, and before that, we uncovered that 323,000 residents of NYCHA were without heat and hot water during the winter season. The capital budget needs of NYCHA is somewhere around $25 billion, a huge amount of money. The Southern District of the Department of Justice is looking at lead paint issues, mold issues, and other issues. There will probably be a cost associated with that when there is some type of resolution. Ultimately, we need to get these repairs done. 400,000 New Yorkers are living in public housing, and they deserve habitable buildings and homes. The council, in our budget response, asked for the mayor to put in over $2 billion of our capital budget dollars towards some of these emergency repairs and also build affordable senior housing on NYCHA properties.
What about the lead paint inspections? That seems like almost criminal negligence.
Well, this is part of what the Department of Justice is looking at. And, we have major concerns in wanting to ensure that every child who lives in public housing and every child who lives across New York City is protected from lead paint poisoning. It still happens to thousands of children every single year, which has a lifelong effect on their development, on their brains, and we have to make sure that they're protected. So one of the major things on NYCHA is to ensure that there is no lead paint in any apartment that a child is living in.
Emma Fitzsimmons had a story at the Times not long ago about the Long Island Access project by the MTA. You said if the MTA can't get that right, how are they going to get the emergency subway repairs right? But what else are you going to do? Who else are you going to go to if not them?
Well, the East Side Access Project is billions of dollars over schedule, over budget, and years behind schedule. And that project is going to serve less than 200,000 people a day.
So should they abandon it now?
I don't know if they should abandon it, but it really is a prime example of the fact that there are major cost issues at the MTA, there are major deadline issues at the MTA, and anyone who's a strap hanger in New York City, 6 million people who take the subways every single day, we need to fix the tracks, fix the signals, fix the water damage that's coming in, and have not just a 21st century subway system, but a 22nd century subway system. We deserve that. New Yorkers deserve that. The subway system, when it works, is the lifeblood of New York City, and we have to do better in many ways. And so we have to really push for the riders who use the system every single day. 6 million people on the buses, 6 million people on the subways, 2 million people on the buses. That's 8 million people on subways and buses. And East Side Access is going to serve less than 200,000 people, years behind schedule, billions of dollars over budget. A horrible example of what's happened at the MTA.
Is that the mayor's responsibility or the governor's?
Oh, well, it's the MTA board's responsibility. This project was first proposed by former Senator Al D'Amato before he left office in 1998. And we are 20 years later and still paying for a project. There have been multiple MTA chairs since then, multiple heads of the MTA. It shows real, mistrust in government when people see this happen.
The mayor and the governor at each other's throats now, probably more than ever.
Really?
Mayors and governors always have been. But who's right in this? You're sort of stuck in the middle. You're not able to be an honest broker between them. So far, no one has been. But who's right?
I really try to do things on the merits. So when I think that the mayor is right, I work with the mayor. When I think the governor is right, I work with the governor. Ultimately, as Speaker of the City Council, representing a body of 51 diverse members in neighborhoods all across the city, I think each one of us in the council want to see results on behalf of the vast majority of New Yorkers. We're up to over 8.6 million people who live in our city. The Department of City Planning projected we're going to cross the 9 million mark by 2030. And so when the mayor's right, I'll work with him. When the governor's right, I'll work with him. And I'm trying not to get pulled into political squabbles on either side, but really do things on the merits.
Let me pull you in a little bit. Are you supporting the governor for re-election?
I haven't had that conversation with the governor yet. I will get involved.
You need to have a conversation to say, okay, the guy's been in office, he's done a good job, he's got a fight from his left a little bit, but hey, how could I not support him for re-election?
Well, I think anytime you make an endorsement of someone, you want to actually have a conversation with them about things that are important to you.
Well, what would you ask him?
Well, I would ask that New York City get more. We give a lot to the state. I would ask them for more education funding. We got an increase this past year. I would ask for us having more say in how the MTA is run. I would ask in more money when it comes to homeless spending and social services. I would ask for a lot of things. We haven't had that conversation yet. We will have that conversation. There are plenty of things I think he's done right. The fight for 15, increasing the minimum wage, gun safety, marriage equality, the Excelsior Scholarship for CUNY and SUNY, all good things, but I'll have that conversation with him.
Good luck. Come back to us when you let us know. Thanks to City Council Speaker Corey Johnson for joining us. The writer Todd Purdum next with Something Wonderful. Welcome back. Joining me now, my former Times colleague, Todd Purdum. He's now a contributing editor of Vanity Fair magazine, senior writer at Politico. His latest book reveals another side of him, the musical theater lover. It's called Something Wonderful, Rodgers and Hammerstein's Broadway Revolution, just been published by Henry Holt & Company, reviewed in this Sunday's Times book review. Todd, you begin, or you have in the book an anecdote that reminds me of something that happened to me. When I went to Ebbets Field for the first time, I walked out into the through the passageway and was stunned because my view of baseball was always from black and white television, black and white newspaper photographs, and I walked through and was stunned that the field was beautiful, bright green. And something sort of similar, or maybe the opposite, happened to you when you went to the theater in Chicago.
Yes, when I was 8 years old, my parents took me and my sister to see a touring company production of Mame, starring Celeste Holm, who was the original Ado Annie in Oklahoma. Because I'd grown up seeing movies and television in color, we went to the Schubert Theater, and the publicity pictures in the forecourt were all, and I said to my parents, "Oh no, the show's in black and white?" They said, "No, it's live with real people on the stage." I couldn't believe it. I was hooked.
And you were hooked indeed. Now, did you ever want to be an actor? Your uncle was.
My uncle was an actor. I think there was a time maybe in 3rd or 4th grade when I thought I wanted to be an actor. I acted in high school and college in musical theater productions. I knew that as an actor I was a good writer, let's put it that way.
You said this book was suggested by your wife, Dee Dee, and you at first didn't have the confidence to write it. Maybe you didn't have the confidence to be an actor, but you're a great writer. Why not the confidence to write this?
Well, because I'm known mostly as a political reporter in my 23 years at the Times, and since I left the Times for Vanity Fair and now Politico, I mostly have covered politics, although as you remember at the Times,
but politicians are actors.
No, and in some ways they are, and as Ronald Reagan said, you know, how he didn't see anyone who could be president who couldn't be an actor. But even in my years at the Times, I would moonlight sometimes on cultural topics, including a couple of stories about Rodgers and Hammerstein. So when Dee Dee said, "This is really what you care about," I talked to the publisher, Henry Holt, and I went through a whole long list of ideas, and they were like, maybe. And then I said, well, how about Rodgers and Hammerstein? And to my great surprise and pleasure, they said yes.
Tell me a little bit about how a musical is put together. What comes first, the music or the lyrics?
Well, you know, Sammy Cahn, the great songwriter, said what comes first is either said the money or the phone call. But in the case of Rodgers and Hammerstein, the lyrics almost always came first, and then Richard Rodgers wrote the music. That was precisely the opposite way they'd collaborated with their previous partners, in Hammerstein's case, mostly Jerome Kern, Rodgers, Larry Hart. But I think because the words came first, it had the effect of giving Richard Rodgers the message, the story, the scene, the character, the depth of feeling and emotion that then he wrote the music to suit. So I think people say that Richard Rodgers' music got deeper and darker and in some ways richer in his collaboration with Hammerstein, and I think it's because the words came first.
Did Rodgers really write the music that quickly?
He was very, very fast, although he said his reputation was a bit overblown because he'd spent weeks, if not months, thinking about the story, the character, the song, what voice part it would be sung with, maybe what tempo it would be. So yes, he wrote Bali High for South Pacific in 5 minutes at lunch, but he'd been thinking about it for months.
You point out in the book that those musicals, particularly South Pacific, some of the others, The King and I, seemed fairly radical or certainly liberal in terms of racial themes at the time, but in retrospect, some of them were not as liberal from a gender point of view. Stepping back, where do they
it's funny.
fit?
Each new generation has been able to rediscover the works on their own. In the 60s and 70s, in the middle of Vietnam, for example, both The King and I and South Pacific were somewhat controversial because they were thought to have kind of pro-Western idealized views of Western power versus Asian ignorance. South Pacific was considered to be completely unrevivable because, after all, who'd want to see a musical about a popular American war in Asia? But in 2008, when Lincoln Center Theater revived it, in the middle of the 2008 presidential campaign with an African-American candidate for president, let's just say its message of "you've got to be carefully taught" resonated with new generation in a completely new and fresh way. Now we're seeing Carousel revived on Broadway as we speak, admittedly a very difficult story about, in some sense, spousal abuse. But I think each generation is able to reinterpret these works, accept them on their own terms, and apply their own sensibility to them. But the stories remain, and the stories are eternal.
Could they write the same kinds of musicals today?
I suspect if they were alive today, they'd be writing a pioneering version of musicals of their own, and they'd probably be the biggest fans of Hamilton because they were all about, especially in the beginning, breaking barriers, trying new things, going where people had not gone before. They were anything but whiskers on kittens and raindrops on roses. They were edgy pioneers. They were trying to break new ground.
But you say after their first flop, the age of innovation kind of ended for them.
They got more cautious, and certainly they were determined after Allegro, which was in 1947, to make their next show a smash hit, and it was in South Pacific. It's my favorite show because it's in some ways the most journalistic. It's ripped from the headlines. Everybody would have had an experience with World War II, and it's very in the moment, which is why it was such a big hit. But they continued to try new things. I mean, The King and I, after all, there's no kiss between the protagonists, but they dance the polka in an unbelievably sexy way. So they did not give up their creativity. They just didn't take the same degree of risks.
They worked in separate rooms. Did they like each other?
Well, they each went to their grave, one unsure if the other had really liked him. They weren't personally intimate or close. They did usually work in separate rooms, Hammerstein writing the lyrics first, Rodgers in his apartment writing the music. It wasn't like a movie where they were sitting around the piano writing songs together.
Not a partner's desk.
Not a partner's desk, no. Hammerstein actually worked standing up at a captain's desk at his farm in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. But they did see eye to eye creatively, and there's no record of their ever having a big creative disagreement. They had some personal disappointments, but no big creative crises.
Todd Purdum, thanks for joining us. Something Wonderful, Rodgers and Hammerstein's Broadway Revolution, just been published by Henry Holt & Company, reviewed in the Sunday Times Book Review. And Todd joins my Times colleague Eleanor Randolph on the backstory next. Welcome back, and where to begin? A comedian excoriated for her material and delivery at the White House Correspondents' dinner. President Trump's doctor made headlines, and former Mayor Giuliani dropped a bombshell. Joining me to discuss these stories and more, my former Times colleague Todd Purdum and Times contributing writer Eleanor Randolph. Todd, you've been away from the Times for a while. You haven't been away from the news. How does the feud between Mayor de Blasio, Andrew Cuomo look from afar?
Well, there is a long history of feuds between City Hall and Albany. This seems to be a particularly vicious one, all the more so because they were once close allies. It certainly is from California, where I live now, you can see that it looks like it's impeding progress on really important questions, whether it's the subway or a whole host of other issues that affect both the city and the state.
That's really true, especially like, public housing. There's some question about whether Andrew Cuomo is just stepping into that issue without getting anything really done.
Eleanor, we've gone months and months, maybe even a full year, without Rudy Giuliani making news. And then all of a sudden, in an interview, he says, no, the president lied, in effect.
I just don't think, I think some people get really unhappy if they're too far away from the Klieg lights. And I think that's really true of Rudy. But the other thing I was thinking about, Todd and I were talking about Rudy as mayor. But before he was mayor, he was a prosecutor. He prosecuted the mob, and he knows a lot about conspiracies.
Municipal corruption.
Municipal corruption and things like that. And I mean, I don't know that he's ever been a defense attorney or, gone very far in that direction.
Well, he's done white-collar defense.
At Patterson-Belknap.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes. Well, is this white-collar defense, do you think?
Well, I think he's...
Well, I hope so.
on the face of it, it looks like he's trying to get the president off the hook on a question of campaign finance violations. But in doing so, he's acknowledging that the president has at least dissembled to the American public and the press. And also, there are technical campaign finance issues about whether he properly disclosed this. So it's apart from throwing a big dust cloud into the whole thing and trying to say the president was trying to protect his family, I'm not sure that he's done the president any good.
Well, also, the very use of the word funnel was interesting, that it was funneled through a law firm. I mean, that's the kind of word you use in an indictment, not an attempt to clear someone.
Well, yes, Hannity, I think, used the word funnel, and then Rudy, made the classic politician's mistake of picking up and repeating the.
Well, I think you've touched on something. I really think one of the things they're doing is it's a classic lawyer's ploy, which is that you confuse everything. You just add so many things in that people say, well, what the heck? I don't can't deal with that anymore. It's
Except the one person I think who can deal with it and who's
Is
not,
Mueller.
yeah, Bob Mueller, he's not going to throw up his hands. He's going to be there.
Let's hope.
You know, and the whole notion that Rudy Giuliani, through his masterly skills of negotiation, is going to make the Mueller investigation go away, that seems to be part of why the Trump White House says that he's been brought onto the case. That's not how this kind of investigation works, no matter how much Mueller and Rudy may have worked together in the aftermath of 9/11. It's just not how it works.
You wrote last fall that that President Trump has diminished the White House, diminished the presidency. How much worse has it gotten since then, and where do you think it's going to wind up?
Well, I think what our colleague on the op-ed page, Tom Edsel, and other people have written about that's so disturbing is there's ample polling evidence and other empirical evidence now that agree, forget the presidency. The president has undermined trust in vital institutions of America, from the FBI to the government to the military to the judiciary to the press. And I think putting that toothpaste back in the tube is going to be the work of a lifetime.
Eleanor?
I agree. I mean, absolutely. You just think, how can this man lie so often and people not worry about it and not care? So what happens is the truth is no longer important, and for those of us who are journalists, that's really bad news.
Andrew Cuomo and Mayor de Blasio both trying to project themselves as leaders of a progressive movement across the country. We tend to look with blinders of sorts in New York, looking a broader perspective from the other end of the country. Does anybody care about Andrew Cuomo and Bill de Blasio?
Well, it's an interesting question because, you know, our mayor in Los Angeles, Eric Garcetti, is just this close to launching a presidential campaign of his own. So does anybody in New York or Pennsylvania or Detroit or Chicago care about Eric Garcetti? What's interesting is that the two biggest states, California and New York, which once dominated national politics in California with the Republicans, New York with the Democrats, neither one seems likely to be fielding a very persuasive national candidate in 2020. And all they are is the ATMs for both parties. People come to raise money there. But I wouldn't say we're politically irrelevant because obviously in the popular vote, those states are hugely important. But they're part of the coastal fringes now that may be losing the power in terms of the Electoral College to pick a president.
And Todd, let me ask you a quick, totally loaded question. If you had been at the New York Times covering the presidential campaign in 2016, and in retrospect, what do you think you would have done differently?
Oh, covering the presidential campaign? In other words, I'm supposed to critique my alma mater now?
Yes.
I guess the one thing I would say is the most important story I ever wrote about Donald Trump for the New York Times was his getting his marriage license with Marla Maples at City Hall. And Max Frankel, then the editor, said, I'm thinking of canceling your transfer to Washington so you can cover society here in New York. Because everyone in New York treated Donald Trump as a joke. And I guess I would have to say that in the beginning of his presidential campaign, the national media, including the New York Times, didn't probably take him as seriously as we all should have, and we've been playing catch-up ever since.
That is what everybody has said, that we didn't look at the people who really liked Trump and thought he was wonderful.
Well, we're still not doing that, I think. Thanks to Todd Purdum, Eleanor Randolph, and coming up next, Coda. Even now, I can sit in the subway and look up at the ads and close my eyes. And there's Miss Subways, Mayor Koch once recalled. She wasn't the most beautiful girl in the world, but she was ours. She was our own Miss America. Most New Yorkers may not remember those eye-catching girl next door photographs. They were conceived by J. Walter Thompson to lure riders to the adjacent placards leased by Walter O'Malley's advertising agency to soap, beer, cigarette, soda, liquor, and laxative companies. I was reminded of the competition, which originally began in 1941 and survived until 1976, when I read David Duchovny's new novel. It's called Miss Subways. If you're less familiar with Duchovny's fiction than his face, he starred in The X-Files and Californication, you'll be pleasantly surprised to find that with degrees in English literature from Princeton and Yale, he's as good a novelist as he is an actor on television. Reading about Miss Subways also evoked Overlooked No More. That's the Times series that was launched in March for Women's History Month. It's our belated celebration of people who led newsworthy lives, but who, for whatever reason, never received a Times obituary. Thelma Porter's death was largely overlooked. She was Thelma Parros by then, but in 1948, exactly 1 year after Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier in baseball, Miss Porter became the first black Miss Subways. As early as 1942, an Amsterdam News columnist complained to the city's transportation board that the only pictures of blacks in print were maids, butlers, or mammies. In reply, one reader wrote, "This is not just a question of getting a Negro girl chosen as Miss Subways, or even to get modeling jobs in agencies that discriminate at present. This can be the beginning of getting pictures of Negroes in our magazines, newspapers, and subway ads." Thelma Porter was 19 when she was selected. She was a graduate of Eastern District High School, a psychology major at Brooklyn College, and president of the city's NAACP Youth Council. She appeared not only on 9,000 subway posters, but landed on the covers of Ebony and Jet magazines. In 1950, Thelma married Lou Parros, a dentist. She dropped out of college, became a clerk at a Brooklyn factory. The couple had 4 children, followed the Dodgers to California, later moved to Salt Lake City, where Thelma Parros worked for the University of Utah. She died in South Carolina in 2012 at the age of 83. The Encyclopedia of African American Popular Culture credits her as the first black woman to integrate a white beauty contest in the country. She was our Miss America. It would take 36 years before the rest of the country caught up and crowned Vanessa Williams. For the New York Times and CUNY TV, I'm Sam Roberts.